Okay, now? All right. I was voluntarily muted. Okay. So this is going to be a long day, and I don't know whether you know learning theory very much, but you're only supposed to learn in chunks and then have a day off of reflection and take a shower and let the creative ideas flow. So we're not doing that today. But there are enough breaks, and we'll build on it from doing this. Could I have my slide up, please? Never say please to technology. Gives them too much power. Okay. I want to talk about our newest work, which I call it the unplanned digital revolution, not because nobody's doing any planning, but because it's impossible to plan it in any coordinated way, and that's good. It gives you a lot of room for innovation. We're also at the beginning of, I think, a revolutionary pedagogical change that you heard some of it today, and Young Zhao talked about it in terms of the entrepreneurial work that I want to connect to as well. But it is pretty radical, which means that it's not figured out yet. We're at the beginning stage of something that has to be sorted out through implementation. So I usually think of it now as the change process as directional vision, letting go, and reining in. So directional vision is what do we think we want to achieve. Letting go is trying a lot of different things, but doing it in somewhat of a way where you can learn from it, and reining in is consolidating what you know. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about these three pieces. They certainly are a bridge from this morning where I started. So think of these three concepts, technology, change, knowledge, and pedagogy, as independent domains of knowledge to start with. And the proposition is, how do you integrate them? So we know about, for example, pedagogy. It's actually had a long, long history, but the most precise work in pedagogy is only in the last 5 or 6 years that we're getting a closer look at exactly what that means. The best example is John Hattie and his now 1,100 meta-studies and the effect sizes and that incredible detail about what are the most effective pedagogical practices and what results do you get from them. So we've got a knowledge base in pedagogy that's only recent. Technology, I mentioned there that it has, you could, if you define technology, basically you can trace it back to, thousands of years, but the recent technology has that kind of life of its own, which I call, people are buying it, but they haven't figured out how to use it all that well in a pedagogical sense. And then the change knowledge is that knowledge that's very important about, it's at the macro and the micro level. So the micro level, school leadership, teachers, how do you actually learn to implement something? How do you learn? How do you create the cultures we saw this morning? At the macro level, by that I just mean the system level, how do you actually create the policies and the frameworks for things to work effectively? So I'm going to introduce technology more specifically now and actually be favorably disposed towards this increased use. I know I said it was a wrong driver, so I want to show you a 30-second video clip just to prove to you that I haven't gone over to the other side and fully embraced technology. So we'll take a look at this and then it'll be obvious the lessons from it. So I'm just assuming we have, do we have sound? I don't hear it coming. I do now? Okay. All right, 30 seconds.
Emma. Huh? Emma. 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 Emma.
Au niveau des traitements laxifères, vraiment que large.
Okay. So there's actually two lessons there. I hope you picked up the change lesson. The first lesson, more obvious, technology can't do everything. although I'm sure the Japanese will have an app for that soon, but let's not go there. The second lesson is that judgmentalism is not a very good motivator. It actually does motivate people, but it motivates them to get revenge. And that's not the kind of motivation you want. You want motivation to do something together. So I have some things to position about the work we're doing right now and where I think this is heading towards, that integration of those three things. But I want to touch base with you for the day, and let's do that this way. I'd like you to turn to the person beside you in a moment, and then we're going to pick up about a half a dozen of these. And answer these two questions for yourself, just 2 or 3 people, the way that Jay did it. What's the best idea you've got from today so far? If you think of the things, lots of good ideas, what's the single best idea that's sticking with you? And the second question is, what's the biggest problem or puzzle that remains foremost on your mind about the improvement agenda? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for the 3 of you to talk that way. And then we're going to use the microphones. I'm going to start with the first question, get 2 or 3 examples from the floor, and then we'll start by the second part, by the question mark side. So 5 minutes to yourselves. What have you learned so far today, and what questions are on your mind? Go ahead. Okay, let's come back together, please. Let's get back, full group. All right, let's get together. I don't have my bell. Okay. All right, let's just take stock here a little bit. I'm going to start over here, and we've got a microphone there. We'll come to you. And we'll just take the first question. So anybody in this section, for starters, raise your hand and comment on the best idea you got from today. Could you walk down, just follow the hand. Keep your hand up, yeah? Okay.
For me, I think the analogy of the GPS and where are we going and where are we taking our students.
Okay.
And I think partly because that we don't really know. And I liked the analogy that that gave us and the questions it raises. And then also linking to that was what we talked about in the one straight after lunch, about thinking backwards and backwards planning as well. Because again, that it links in. We need to know where we're going, I think. And
so this is
difficult
actually
these days.
What I'm getting into. It's actually hard to backward map if you don't know where you're going. I don't know where you should go. So there's an ambiguity now in learning that we have never had before that I'm going to unpack and open up. Okay,
we have so many routes as well to take these days. There's not such a clear path. Yeah,
that's right. Okay. So how do you go about this if the path and the goal are not that clear? So we'll talk about that. Let's stick with the plus side. That's the first question. Best idea, or the idea that best connected with you. Anybody in the middle, raise your hand. I can see there's that end at the back. They want to give you more exercise here. Nobody at the front. Okay, right here, and then we'll go to the back. Go ahead.
I like the idea of the Stone Age did not end because they ran out of stones. The idea of evolving.
Yeah, very good. Okay. So the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of stone. It's because other good things were coming along. The very back, getting to you. Yep. Keep your hand up, and we'll find you. Okay.
I really liked your idea of talk the walk. I thought that was a great expression to develop.
Okay.
That really made us realize that we had to perhaps get the students even. I mean, another way of doing it is to elicit, get them to do the walk and then elicit the talk from them. That
right. And this is metacognition. This is talking the walk about learning. You don't want researchers like me to tell your story. You want to tell your story to each other as you're doing it. And we can enable that, but you don't want us to be the proxy for doing that. So either one now, we'll just do 2 or 3 more at the maximum, either the best idea or a question mark. We'll start in these 2 sections. Anybody can raise their hand, still continuing. Best idea or a question mark you want to raise. We'll open it up to the whole room. Anybody in the room? Okay, over here.
I really like the idea of that even creativity needs a domain. But my big question is, what does that school look like?
Yeah.
Where you've got people being able to choose what they do, what they specialize in. He gave the example of Michael Phelps. You know, what had happened if he'd not learned, if he hadn't been swimming because they were waiting for him to read. Or what would happen if he hadn't become a swimmer and hadn't learned to read? So just turn that around a little bit. Are we making sure we're going to still have the basic skills in that school? What are those basic skills, and what does that school look like?
Okay, and that's a great question. And I said at the outset, the short answer to it is we don't know. That is the short answer. And but the better answer is this is the very process that I'm going to open up for you. It's to operationalize creativity, to get inside that. So some of the things we're thinking about now, or if you just go to the discussion of it, Sir Ken Robinson, fantastic ideas about creativity, but you really don't know what he's talking about in terms of day-to-day, how you do this. That you have that kind of opening up. We're thinking that creativity, you'll hear me talk about the 6 C's, that creativity may be the lever for the other 5. In other words, if you get creativity right, critical thinking, collaboration, problem solving can fall into line. But this is the big experiment. It's no more than an experiment. It's a big learning laboratory right now, is that these ideas, we know what's, I'll express it this way, freedom from and freedom to. Just think of those concepts. We want freedom from the wrong drivers, for reasons I said. So you get that, you get freedom from that, and then you open up a new problem. You've got freedom to do something, but you don't know what to do together. So this is the threatening problem now for us. It's a better problem than being stuck, but it's still a problem because you have to figure out, even if we get the freedom, we actually don't know how to use it. And this is the next phase, and again, I'm leading towards that now. Let's have one final comment from the room on either of these. Just anywhere in the room. Last one to hear from you. Do we hear from somebody? Yes. Okay. You'll get a microphone. Yeah.
The best idea, one of the best ideas, in my case, was the concept of systemness. Think about this bigger picture and collaborating, not only focusing on the students you've got in your class, but thinking at least in our school, like the school you belong to.
Yeah. Okay, so systemness, and I don't want it to be a fancy concept. Only think of a bigger picture than your part, and be part of that, and then it can be bigger and bigger. All right, so let's get into the talk that I wanted to go with. The unplanned, I still think it's that the planning has to come in the doing of it, but I want to talk, I'll show you a couple of things about the push factor and the pull factor. I'm using it slightly differently than I did about change. So the push factor is that traditional schooling is increasingly boring for students and alienating for teachers. It's not a criticism, it's just a description. That traditional schooling is boring. What that means is it pushes you out psychologically from putting the effort into the school for students, or pushing you out literally. Same for teachers. Teachers were, one of the schools we filmed that I didn't show, the principal said, well, the teachers were bored too, but they didn't know it until we tried some new things, that they saw the excitement in it. The pull factor is the ever-alluring digital world. It's got some problems. One of the early chapters I did in the book Stratosphere is called the dark side of the internet. So lots of problems, but you don't have a choice now. You just have to figure out how to relate to it. And another pull factor is how these pedagogies are opening up, again, using John Hattie as one of the stepping stones towards that. So on the boring side, I'll show you a graph here that this is from the United States. You know this, but when you see it graphically, it really jumps out at you. These are, this is Lee Jenkins is his name. With a few thousand teachers, he's been asking them, they're at different grade levels, how enthused are your students about schooling? Ask the teachers. And so he finds that, you can see that kindergarten, very high percentage. This is the teacher's perception of the students. And then it goes down to grade 9 is 37%. The vast majority, in other words, or the majority of students are not finding it all that interesting. There's only one thing I can think of that's worse than being bored, and that is having to teach the board. That's a harder thing to do. So that's where we are. Here's another example from Russ Qualia, from students now. This is not from teachers. We have similar data in Canada, incidentally. I don't know what your data would be exactly, but we do know that traditional schooling is not very exciting. So disengaged students, I put in my best effort, goes down from grade 6 to grade 11. You can see it that way. And so this is, Russ just published his book on student voice, Corwin Publishers. Qualia is Q-U-A-G-L-I-A, so Qualia. Russ Qualia, you can hear again what students are saying. So that's the push factor, and what it results in is this happy, engaged students in kindergarten that then fades away into boredom. But the worst problem in some ways is the teacher dissatisfaction that results from this. And then when you think of teachers, the teacher at the end of, hopefully it's at the end of Friday and not the end of Monday that she looks like that. Teachers, again, saying job satisfaction is declining, all of those things. So we like the push factor because the push factor says people don't like the status quo. They're not going to stand for it. And therefore, we can then begin to shift the notion and say, what's the alternative look like? And how do we develop it? So what I said in Stratosphere is the solution to the push factor has to meet at least these following 4 criteria. One, irresistibly engaging for both students and teachers. In other words, the solution has to be engaging, irresistibly engaging for both. Elegantly efficient and easy to use. Access to the technology that's not too complicated. This is the Steve Jobs criterion, where you build the problems, you build the complexity into the design of the equipment so that ease of use is enhanced. Thirdly, it has to be, we now usually use the word digitally ubiquitous. This means that the school day is no longer 9 to 4. It's 24/7. It's 7 days a week. It's open. So that's got to be that. And then the work itself. The fourth one doesn't come up. The fourth one is steeped in real-life problem solving. In other words, the curriculum has to be about life. It has to be how do you deal with sustainability? How do you deal with your neighborhood? What are the issues doing it? So there's a whole set of things now that this opportunity must meet, that traditional schooling not only doesn't meet it, but it gets in the way. So how do you open this up, and what does the agenda look like? We are opening it up, I mentioned this morning, but just to restate it, because we don't know what to do, or recommend, because we know some of the lines of development, we go back to our doing strategy and say, how are we going to discover those? One way of doing it is to study and research and come up with ideas. It's not good enough because it's happening too quickly and it won't be as accurate. So our best way of finding out quickly is to team up with people who want to do it and team up on a fairly large scale. So we've established a project that's called New Pedagogies for Deep Learning. I'll mention the concepts in a few minutes. And it's based on that design that I referred to this morning of recruiting 100 clusters, recruiting 10 groups of 100 schools from 10 different countries, so 1,000 schools. So 10 groups or clusters from 10 different countries. And we have, if I just go from the south, north here, that we have a cluster of 200 in Uruguay that I'll mention in a few minutes what they're doing. We have Idaho, cluster of 100 schools. We have California, another cluster of 100 schools merging. We've got Ontario with 110 schools. It's the average amount. We then, if we go east from Ontario, we get to Scotland, Netherlands. Then we also have Singapore that's part of it, and Finland. Australia is also part. So 10 of these, I think that's about 10. And the idea is that each of these clusters are signing on because they want to move in this direction. And they're not signing on to do our ideas. They're saying, we want to move in this direction. We all agree we don't know how to exactly do it, so let's discover it through the journey. Let's have mechanisms to do it and discover the learning. So it's not an imposed one, it's a voluntary one, but you come into obligations of having to move forward on this. And each cluster has one or more cluster leaders that are local leaders, so that they do a lot of the work of coordinating and deciding how to do it. And our role is, as the support system for it, is to do two things. One is to provide some of the frame of the direction, which they already have bought into because we call it the stratosphere agenda, because that's the title I use to integrate the three things. So they buy into that. And the second thing that they do is that they know they're in the relationship with us that we're going to focus on two things. One is capacity building. What do you need to be skilled at for this to work? And I'll show this on the screen in a few minutes. So capacity building is one thing. And the other thing is monitoring how well we're doing, the progress. You can call it research, but it's more feeding into further development. So this is the invitation. And what we're providing is the framework, but the people that are in it are taking the concepts, so that we help them that way, but they're creating their own local, national, or state or province versions of it in practice by doing it. So the new pedagogy, there are basically three concepts: the pedagogy itself, the learning outcomes, and then we double back the conditions at the school and the system level for that to work. We like to keep things simple. Even if we're doing them big, I want to be able to describe it as 3, 4, 5, maximum 6 things. So the learning partnership between and among students, teachers, and families, what does that mean? It means that, and we have examples, I won't show so many clips now. These are preliminary clips anyways, they're not the full versions, but what they show is that the teachers and the students have a very different relationship. Students have more opportunity to engage and lead their own learning. Still lots of collaboration between and among teachers and students. There's a learning partnership that's identified. You link it to families. A lot of this stuff is new. We know what it looks like in preliminary form, but to get it to happen very precisely with big impact is going to be difficult, and that's what we are working on. So you have the new pedagogy, and what does that mean? You just think of it practically. If you introduce the technology, it gets more and more present. If you talk about new learning goals, as I'm going to show the learning outcomes, and you're striving for those instead of the traditional ones, how would you actually set up a learning relationship that would make those things thrive? So that's the partnership. I'll give you a hint on some of it. This is from John Hattie, who is getting more and more, I guess I'll say, developed. He's now started with his 1,000 meta-studies and identified about 60 teaching practices or pedagogical practices and began to assess them and determine their effect sizes in terms of their impact on student engagement and student learning. So his initial list, you go back to Visible Learning, the first book of 4 or 5 years ago, he said, okay, here are 60 practices, here are their effect sizes. He said, here are some things that actually make matters worse, so don't do them. Their effect sizes are negative. Here are some things that are so-so, with a lot of work you can get some big impact. And then here are some of the other end, another dozen, like student feedback, well done in specific terms, that have a high yield, and therefore we should gravitate towards them. That was not a fixed list, that was his first assessment of what the research tells us around the world. And in effect sizes, he said anything below 0.40 is not worth looking at. So anything below 0.40, anything above, when it gets higher and higher, all the better. So this is, again, a guideline. And so you look at, he clustered these, and if you look at these teaching practices, I'm not going to break them down, but simulation and gaming, inquiry-based, smaller class size, etc. Things that you think will make a big difference, he said, when you actually look at them, they don't make a big difference. So if you look in there, there are two things that stand out for me. One is about technology. There are two things, simulations and gaming and web-based learning. They're in there and they show low impact size. What could be the explanation? Here's my explanation. They are in the weak category because they were implemented superficially, pedagogically. They were used superficially pedagogically. Okay, kids, go and use the web. No guidance, whatever. So it's not that they don't have potential, it's just that if you use them superficially, you don't get much out of it. The second thing, and this label is his, teacher as facilitator. In the jargon, people say, well, we have to move from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side. The teacher as the font of all knowledge to being a guide on the side. It turns out the guide on the side is too passive. Just being a guide on the side means that pedagogically there's not enough engagement. So the teacher's role definitely moves away from front and center, but it's got to be replaced by something that's proactive. What is that proactivity? It's not passive facilitation. It's closer to, this is his word, teacher as activator. We tend to use change agent or designer of learning. And again, you see some of his early list of things. It's not that this list should be taken literally, because it's still got a lot of validity, but the concepts open up. And the concepts are, what does teacher as activator look like? And if you go to the 3 videos that we've done on the preliminary version of this, you saw part of Park Manor. You can see W.G. Davis is a second senior public school. And then you can see Central Peel Secondary School. These are all on my website. 10 minutes each, 3 schools that had various degrees of nothing to start with. What Park Manor had was just okay, but all a distance. The other 2 schools had really alienation of students and teachers. And within 2 full years, they became dynamically engaged. I'm not saying they accomplished everything that they should accomplish, but their cultures of learning changed dramatically from being passive and alienating for the teachers as well as the students to be hugely engaging, where students couldn't wait to come to work, to school the next day. Teachers couldn't wait to get there. A feeling of engagement, excitement coming from this development. So it's the teacher as activator that we want to open up and say, what does this really look like? If you look then at, this is kind of the pedagogical means of getting there. If you look at the next part, which is the outcomes, we heard Young Zhao say, well, 6 C's, 20 C's, how many C's are you going to end up with? We have started ourselves with 6 C's, and I wanted to say a couple of things about them. You'll see them in the center. They're not, you actually saw Park Manor using them. They didn't get them from us. They got them because they were working directly on this. And what we're trying to do is get at the academic or intellectual skills, which tend to be 3 to 6, along with the more individual character education and citizenship skills. And so think of these as the learning outcomes that we might be striving for. We are attempting and are, in fact, attempting to operationalize them to describe them. And we're also working on assessing them. But I want to go back to something I said earlier today, which was our interest in an assessment is not to prescribe it, but to be more precise about what it looks like so we can decide whether it's good and look more from it. So all of those things can be, they can be measured, they can be built into the curriculum. One of the things that Young Zhao mentioned was entrepreneurship. And remember that diagram he showed where the countries that were doing best on PISA were the countries that were less impressive on entrepreneurship. Interesting thing to start to open up, in which we're doing, and that he used actually these very words, ethical entrepreneurship. So think of it this way, that this is for the students we're talking about. I'm wanting to talk about the teachers in a moment. But if you think of the experience now that we are creating in our 1,000 schools, attempting to create, the ones that we see should be in the right direction. These are students that are highly engaged in the learning and how to learn on their own, to be really excited about schooling, to produce things that are of value to the local community, and to develop from there. And at the same time, they're learning how to be more entrepreneurial, which means that you're good at invention, at new ideas, at doing something novel, at figuring things out, and that's built into the learning phrase. Usually we think of entrepreneurial as related to business. This is, you make more money and make more success. But in the new work, and there's certainly ones that he embraces, it relates not just to business, but also to social entrepreneurialism. If you want to improve, for example, the life of old people over the age of 85 or 90, what would you do? What would you do? If you wanted to give opportunities to people that were disadvantaged, how would you do that? This is social entrepreneurialism, and it's a very important part of learning how to be a citizen of the future, locally and globally. He also mentioned another part that I'm interested in. He said the number of patents that are created by countries that are not necessarily high on PISA are high on patents. Well, the patents as a proxy for innovation. Patents as a proxy for innovation isn't a very good one necessarily. If the patents are created here by a subgroup, we showed another value, the second machine age, that analysis. If you create patents and you have a lot of innovation, but it's confined to an elite, so the top 5%, 10%, it's they that benefit from the patent, not the broader society. So they get richer while the broader society gets poorer. And again, he showed that figure. So you want patents and innovation to be effective. If I take the automobile industry, which many of us have tracked over the years, as examples, Toyota was the first example of a culture that seemed to have a lot of good things, shared a sense of direction, a lot of deep understanding of their work, and then they began to fall off the track because they were interested, they actually went wrong the day they decided we want to be bigger than General Motors. And then because of that goal, they kind of sacrificed some others. I was just reading a new account of the last 100 years or so of Toyota, which basically said, when it comes to patents, they integrate their patents into the manufacturing, sales, and implementation. They actually integrate it where most people have R&D over here, produce it, then you try to figure out how to use it. In that case, it's integrated. So I'm getting a little bit far afield here, but I want to say that the new curriculum, the new teaching and learning, has to be focused on this domain for students to have the experiences so that they become more and more like this. This, of course, means that the teachers have to be this good. The teachers also have to be collaborative, have every one of these in terms of the culture. It's another way of describing it. So we have a big agenda here, and it's focused, and you can decide it's too undefined, so we want to step into it. But I'm saying it actually is definable. You heard Park Manor say, we actually have this diagram, this framework. We've got these 6 C's. We teach it every day. We make it visible. If you ask our students what they're about, they'll tell you. They can talk the walk, the students in that school, even though they're only 11 years old or even younger. So this is that next phase that I think is going to open up. If we look at, I just made a slide this afternoon. I mentioned that Uruguay is part of this, and this is all being done by them. All we've done is provide a framework. So they have a plan, CIBAL it's called, and CIBAL is a arm's length government agency in Uruguay that has the responsibility, the ministry is still over here, here's CIBAL over here, to stimulate the implementation of technology and learning in the country. And we've evaluated the first couple of years of it, 2 different reports of evaluation that basically said you're making headway on making technology available to children and students. You're making a headway, in other words, on the equity agenda, but you're not making headway on the quality of learning agenda, which is the pedagogical implementation. They knew that, but they wanted an outsider to say that so they could get simulation. So these are their words. They're not ours. I mean, theirs are in Spanish, but this is their translation. Just in the last 6 months when we were working with them, this is what they've done. And I'm saying it because they're very comparable to yours, except in one difference. The one difference is the government wants to lead this, and therefore they're facilitating it. But the other things, the conditions at the school level, the fact that most teachers, the vast majority of teachers, teach half days in 2 different schools, so you can't get together that easily within a school or across schools. All of those conditions are similar to yours. And in their own term, they said, in the last 6 months, and up and running, we have an implementation team at the center consisting of some teachers from primary level, some from secondary, some from the Ministry of the inspection side of it, some from planning and resources. They've got a diverse team developing this. They're building trust through, these are some of our words, but they're versions of it, through interaction and sharing of practices. establishing learning cycles. They're developing capacity building plan. These are all things, you heard me say them this morning, and here's something, we're not in there side by side with them. We meet with them maybe 3 times a year. We have other online things, but they're taking this and running with us. A lot of openness and sharing, creating the atmosphere that we've got to learn together, looking at professional learning face-to-face, online, video conference, and building in a platform that enables people to share on this. So something you can do with not a lot of resources, but a lot of outreach, a lot of engagement, a lot of development. And that this is their attempt, a very good attempt to say, even though it's messy, even though we don't have a lot of resources, and even though we can't do much face-to-face because it's not practical anyways, we actually can create a system where there'll be growing engagement, where the stuff we'll learn can be shared rapidly through the blogs and through the platforms, and where we can track how well we're doing and how we can get better at it. And they are integrating. This is the change knowledge piece of technology and pedagogy, the change knowledge piece. That the other piece is the technology itself, where they've started with one-on-one technology, very inexpensive. Things get broken a lot, trying to figure how do you make it more established. Technology for online learning, platform for technology, all of those, big technology. And then the hardest part is the pedagogy. What's the new relationship between teachers and students? And I say among teachers and among students in this. That's the hardest part. It's easier to get the hardware and the technology right. It's even easier to get a plan and this phrase right, but how to get the pedagogy established is another part of it. Our way of expressing the bigger picture is this. This is our new pedagogy. If you want to go on the online to see it, it's www.newpedagogies.org. So New Pedagogies is all one word. www.newpedagogies.org. And what we've done is basically we are establishing support systems for 3 things. Tools and rubrics, we call them. That's what they are. And these are the tools and rubrics. We are operationalizing what does it mean to assess the 6 outcomes with an ethical entrepreneurship spirit. What does that look like? A rubric showing early examples and later examples. So we have that. And we use these tools not to say, here's the tool, please implement it. I still like the phrase, a fool with a tool is still a fool, right? But we want tools to help clarify what this looks like. So we've got the 6 learning outcomes with the entrepreneurial ethic wraparound as part of that you could actually see how we're thinking initially of conceptualizing them. We've got, secondly, the new pedagogy. Same idea. When we say that teachers and students are co-learners, how would you describe that? How would you conceptualize it? How would you assess it? And the third thing we're attending to is the conditions, let's call them. The school conditions, which means, it goes back to social capital. It goes back to systemness. It goes back to how schools and school leaders and teams can collaborate to do these things. All the things I talked about at the beginning of the day. And the system conditions, some of them have to do with infrastructure, access to technology, bandwidth and that, so some of that. But others have to do with policy. What are you investing in and how are you helping people, the system, to learn from this? How are you investing in innovation and pulling it out and the learning from there? So what I'd like you to do, just if you think of the whole day now, I'll come back to you for a bit of a close in a few minutes. Think of the whole day. You've come here to learn a lot. And what I want you to do, again, in that group with each other, is say, what am I going to take forward into action? It's not the big plan, remember? We like small implementation plans. But what idea or theme am I going to take forward into action that has been stimulated by what I've heard today, what I've participated, how I've interacted with others? What's next for you? Some additional things will be added tomorrow, but while I have you, I'd like you to address that. We won't process it across the room like we did the last time, but this is for your subgroup. Again, take 5 minutes, internal to the group, and say, given the stimulation of today, the thing that I want to follow up on is, and then finish that sentence. Go ahead. All right, let's return. Okay, let's come back. I'm going to close in the next 5 minutes, so I'll have a 10-minute earlier. So hopefully the sun is still shining. But I want to close on a very important note. And it's about change and it's about you. A while ago, as a change leader, my main problem as posed to me by people in the field was how do we overcome resistance to change? So we worked on that, we have ideas about that. But something has changed about change. And now, the main question we get is not how do we overcome resistance, but how do we do this new thing? People are dying for the knowledge to do it. They're not resistant, they're confused. They're not clear about how to do it. I call it positive contagion, and the very fact that there are 600 of you or so coming out on the weekend, larger than ever, tells me that there's a thirst for the knowledge that we're talking about. There's a high demand for wanting to do something. And I just as you were doing that, one of the people in the front row, in the second 2 rows, who is from Uruguay that I didn't know, came up to me and said, we have 256 groups going and they're learning like crazy. 256 that they are coordinating. And I said, how is it going? And she said one word, fantastic. People can't get enough of it. And that's what you do with these little leverage points. You open it up. And positive contagion is another way of saying people like change, actually, contrary to popular belief. They like it when it's intrinsically interesting. Let's figure out how to do this. I love helping kids learn and get turned on. Secondly, when it's pursued in a non-judgmental culture. Non-judgmental means that the atmosphere is developmental, not accountability in the narrow sense. That we are learning this. It's the mindset of growth applied to adults, applied to the culture. So all of our successes are people who created the climate, again, that you saw in Park Manor in a very small way. It's okay to make mistakes as long as you learn from it. Actually, we will make mistakes because we don't know how to do it, and we have to figure it out, and some of it's going to be that. There's also a rapid learning cycle when people do this. They learn quickly because of their sharing each other's what they know from it. Third, they have some say in the evolution of what it looks like. Call it ownership, call it partnership, whatever you want to do. They're helping to shape their own future, but they're not doing it individually, autonomously. Remember my phrase? If you want to change the group, use the group to change the group. When the group is working, there's a lot of pressure and evaluation and assessment built in because of this culture and this interaction. They sort it out because they are part of it and they're influenced by their peers. Secondly, they're developing ownership with others, and they're beginning to build the capacity as well as the ownership together. I don't know why I seem to be missing a fourth one. I'll put that back up. I think somebody's taking a picture. So think of these, fill in the blank for the and one for yourself, whatever it was. So here's, I think, I'm going to close on this, that we've covered, all of us, today, a huge long learning day with great stimulation and great participation. But the opportunity to do something now, if we can convert it into the social capital, the decision capital, into the networks of schools, into the low cost but high yield ways of learning from each other online as well as face to face, and have an agenda that is exciting and deep, built around the use of technology and the deeper learning outcomes and the higher order accomplishments that we can do together in this. This is the beginning of what some people have called disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation does disrupt. It puts you off balance. If you like a lot of clarity, you will suffer because there's lots of ambiguity. But if you can stand the ambiguity and can use the process to create the clarity, which we know happens when you do it, we know it happens every time, there's great things to be had and great excitement and involvement and accomplishments. Hard work, but now there's something different, I'm going to say, in the next 3 or 4 years that's very different than the last 3 or 4 years, and you should take advantage of it. You should help lead it. Thank you very much for inviting me.